Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SoxProspects.com podcast, the official podcast of the best source on the internet for all the news, scouting, insight, and more on the Boston Red Sox farm system. Thank you for the download or stream. My name is Chris Hatfield. I'm the executive editor of SoxProspects.com and host of the podcast. I'm coming to you live from Sox Prospects Mid-Atlantic here in our nation's capital. It is a lovely Sunday morning, September the 18th, as we record this. The Sox are on Sunday Night Baseball, so little chance of what we're saying here today becoming obsolete within an hour, as can happen sometimes. But I am joined, as always, first by our Director of Scouting, Ian Kundle. Hello, Ian.
Sorry, mute. Hi, Chris. Hi, Matt. How are we doing on this fine Sunday morning? A little brisk,
great,
starting to feel like fall.
Great start. And managing editor Matt Hegel. Welcome back, Matt.
Hey, Chris, Ian. Looking forward to talking some baseball and some football later on today.
Yes. Well, watching football, not discussing it with us later today.
We're not?
Well, we'll see.
The SoxProspects.com football podcast will get
football.
Yeah. Man City played so well yesterday.
That's true.
Little football talk.
I see.
Then that was talking football.
Anyway, before we get into today's episode where we've got a bunch of your emails and questions, we love it. Glad to talk about what you want to hear about. Again, as always, podcast at SoxProspects.com or tweet at us using the hashtag at AskSP. That's hashtag AskSP. We've got a bunch of your questions to get to. We're also going to talk a little bit about wrapping up the minor league season team-wise, not player-wise yet. We're going to wait until later on after Ian gets back from Instructs to wrap up some of the players and things like that, talk rankings. That'll be later on. But just kind of wrap up how the season went for each of the teams. Going to talk the Fall Instructional League rosters, which came out this past week. And we're going to talk a little bit about the San Diego Padres situation. Nothing too in-depth because, frankly, I don't think there really is that much to say about it. But there's been a lot of talk about it in the media, and as well there should be, frankly. But we're going to talk a little bit about that situation with the Drew Pomerantz trade for Anderson Espinoza and the Padres basically hiding medicals from other teams at the trade deadline. But before we do all that, we got to get a few things out of the way. Make sure you subscribe, rate and review. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, we're on Google Play Music, we're on YouTube. All subscribing and rating and reviewing. First off, subscribing is the easiest way for you to get the podcast. You know automatically when it's up. When we put a new episode online, so that's good for you. Good for us because it helps us get into new ears when you rate us, review us, tell us what you like. The algorithms that these things use, the websites and apps use, the ratings help push us up a little bit. So we appreciate that. Also, thanks as always to the Ludlow Thieves for our intro music. Go check out their stuff wherever it is that you consume your audio, whether it's iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, SoundCloud. They're on all of them. I mentioned the emails. The follow site's main Twitter at Sox Prospects. Mine is at SP Chris Hatfield. Matt, tell them where they can get you.
At Matt Hegel, MATTHUEGEL.
And Ian.
At Ian Kundle, IANCUNDALL.
That's like the second time I've already caught you off guard throwing to you today.
Yeah, I was reading the newest email. So.
Get a cup of coffee, my man. Get a cup of coffee.
I told you I haven't eaten anything, so, bring on fumes right now.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's jump into it then. First thing we wanted to talk about was kind of a season wrap-up of each of the minor league teams. The minor league season ended, for most teams, the first week in September. I think the first team that finished was the DSL Red Sox 2, who made the playoffs and ended on September 1st. And the last team that wrapped up was the Salem Red Sox, who were eliminated from the Carolina League playoffs on September 9th. So just delving really quickly into those seasons, I guess should we start at the top, or start at the? Let's start at the bottom. Let's make like Drake and start at the bottom, just because that'll make my wife happy, because she loves Drake. But Pawtucket Red Sox finished the year 74-68, about 16 and a half games out of first place in the International League North, and about 10 and a half games back of the wild card. We're really not in danger of making the playoffs down the stretch, but frankly, I think the story there, guys, is just they thought they were going to have certain guys, and a lot of them wound up in the majors, and some skipped them completely. A lot of Marco Hernandez in the majors. Some guys like Devin Marrero not really hitting. And I think another thing perhaps was that prospect bubble we've been talking about for a few years hitting Pawtucket a little bit. That combined with maybe some seasons out of their pitching staff that may have seemed at least a little bit to be disappointing. But then you look and apparently they set a record for what was it? I think fewest runs allowed in a season out of their pitching staff. So. I don't know. Looking at that lineup at the end of the year on the organization page, I think I'm seeing a lot in the bullpen, maybe, and not a whole lot else. The lineup was a lot of not jaggy guys, but some career minor leaguers, your Chris Dominguez's and Brennan Bosch's, and who else is supposed to be there that I'm missing? Oh, Chris Marrero, of course, who was the team MVP. This was a year that the Paw Sox were a taxi squad more than they were kind of a prospect haven. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so. I mean, with like Brian Johnson missing a lot of the year, that kind of hurt because him or Owens are probably their best pitcher, and Owens sort of had a up and down season too. So Brian Johnson would have probably been their most consistent guy, and that kind of maybe hurt the major league staff as well when they had some issues there. And like you said, the lineup is pretty thin, especially now looking at that lineup. Like Rizny Castillo didn't perform up to standard or what they thought
until the last month, and then the last month he started getting lucky.
Yeah, exactly. So guys moving up and down, and just some underperformance, and some decent guys in the bullpen, but it just not a complete team, I guess.
They were up and down all year too. The Heath Hembreys and Noe Ramirez's of the world, and even the starting pitching. I mean, you look at the starting pitching. Their rotation at the end of the season included Henry Owens, Brian Johnson, as you mentioned, wasn't there because of his anxiety. Roenis Elias was up once or twice, and then Sean O'Sullivan was up once or twice. So it's kind of tough when you're asking, a lot of spot starts from Robbie Scott, who we'll talk about a little later, but wasn't really a prospect haven this year. And Sam Travis getting hurt, of course, too. Tearing his ACL was also not that great for the team. Moving down to Portland, the Sea Dogs finished the year with a 55-84 record, worst in the system, 33 games out of first. They finished last in the Eastern League, Eastern Division. Not a banner year for them. That was also kind of the lineup really didn't have much, especially at the beginning of the year. Then for part of the year, they had Andrew Benintendi, Yohan Moncada, and Mauricio Dubon hitting well. But other than that, it was a lot of. They had to sign a decent amount of minor league free agent filler to fill out the lineup. Guys like Nate Fryman, Ryan Court, Cody Decker were all signed mid-season to fill out that lineup just on a daily basis. In the rotation, also some guys who struggled. Kevin McAvoy didn't have a great year. Keith Couch, who should have been in AAA, was down in Portland a lot of the year just because that's where they had room for him. Teddy Stankwitz had an okay season. And then some guys in the bullpen had good years and some didn't. Luis Isla had a pretty good year. Chandler Shepard started the year hot and got promoted to Pawtucket, but Williams Harris kind of disappointed. They got Ben Taylor mid-season, who was pretty good, but not a whole lot in Portland either this year, Ian.
Yeah, it was a tough year for them. They, as you said, I think the biggest issue was the pitching. I was just looking at the standings from the Eastern League, and they gave up, I think it's like almost 70 runs more than the next highest team. Sorry, 30 runs more than the next highest team, but 70 for the team after that. And they gave up almost 200 runs more than Trenton, who finished 2 games out of first place, if that gives you a perspective. So It was just the pitching was terrible. And offensively, I think a lot of their production seemed to come in the second half, as you alluded to. Once they got Moncada, Dubon, they signed Nate Fryman and Cody Decker, and then Aneri Tavares kind of turned it on in the second half.
True.
But at the same time, it just wasn't enough to make up for that first half, where it was just more or less an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, we should probably also mention Jake Romanski had a pretty decent season at the plate as well. He was kind of one of their more consistent guys all season long. It's kind of funny you mentioned the pitching there. I think this pitching from a performance angle, system-wide, this season was just really disappointing. We just came out with our season-end award winners for the website, and our pitcher of the year was Jake Cosart, the relief pitcher who split the year between Greenville and a little bit in Salem. And for us to give that award to a relief pitcher, there really just was not a starting pitcher. I think Alex Spear gave his pitcher of the year award performance-wise to Roniel Raudes, but I think it's almost by default because his numbers were more steady, but then you factor in his age. Aaron Wilkerson, had he not been traded, probably runs away with it. And I guess that's another thing you got to remember too is, they lost kind of their best starting pitcher in Aaron Wilkerson.
Well, not their best starting pitcher, the one who's performing the best.
Well, that's what I meant.
And then he got bombed. I mean, he was terrible with Milwaukee.
Right,
so,
right.
Like, his ERA was like over 5, I'm pretty sure. So there was
in the Pacific Coast League.
I actually just looked at his numbers, and a lot of his numbers were the same. Strikeouts and walks were almost exactly the same, but he gave up a ton more hits, so that was the big difference with him over in Milwaukee.
Yeah, but not a banner year for Portland. On the other hand, I think the Salem Red Sox were kind of the story of the season, really, in the system. Starting the year with that loaded lineup that included Andrew Benintendi, Yohan Moncada, Rafael Devers, Nick Longy, Mauricio Dubon. Who am I missing? Jordan Procession and Ben Moore at the beginning of the year were two catchers we were kind of interested in. Should have started the year with Michael Kopech, started the year with Travis Lakins, and then over the course of the season, of course, Moncada and Benintendi and Dubon got promoted, but the team kept trucking. I think they won the first half in the Carolina League Southern Division, and they finished in second in the second half, got into the playoffs, and lost to Myrtle Beach in the first round in best of three games in a best of 3 series. So pretty good season for them, and I think probably one of the better lineups, especially beginning of the year, we've seen in a long time. Even strong in the bullpen with Corey Pimentel, Anielo Leclerc for a lot of the season. Early in the year, they had Ben Taylor pitching great, Jake Drahoff. The pitching was okay. Kopech, when he eventually got there, was probably the biggest boom or bust season we've seen from a guy in the system ever. He either struck out half the batters he faced in an outing or didn't make it out of the first inning, which was pretty crazy. But Trey Ball had another kind of meh season. Lakins was a little bit disappointing, I think, performance-wise. I think we were expecting a little bit more out of him from the preseason hype. Matt Kent, who we'll talk about in a little bit, had a decent year. And Daniel McGrath was, again, another kind of nondescript season, although he did miss some of the year due to injury as well. Pretty good season out of Salem, Matt.
Yeah, for sure. Sort of a definitely better all-around team than the other teams we've looked at so far. Like you said, early in the season they had all the prospects, and they also had guys contribute who were a little under the radar. Joseph Monge came up from Greenville, and he's been pretty good and sort of put himself on the map a little bit as far as a prospect. I mean, he's not, he's a top 60 prospect at this point, but
Right.
He has some tools. Maybe he could continue that performance next season. See how he does in Double-A. Guys like Jace Ray contributed, an independent leaguer. So Jake Cosart came up and was really good towards the end of the season. So just a really pretty well-rounded team with young guys and older guys contributing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And a team that really I think didn't quite have the hype coming in that Salem did, but also wound up being very interesting from a prospect standpoint was Greenville. The Drive finished 10 games out of first place in the Southern Division of the South Atlantic League at 33-37 in the second half. In the first half, they they finished in second at 37-32, 5 games back. So missed the playoffs, but good year out of them. A lot of guys really kind of broke out down there. Josh Ockamy, Trenton Kemp, Tate Matheny, Kyrie Washington. Some guys who had pretty good years, maybe not top 100 prospect type years, but were pretty good. And like you mentioned, Joseph Monhe getting promoted to Salem. Jeremy Rivera even got a cup of coffee late in the year when he started to hit. He went up for the playoffs in the Carolina League because basically they needed a defensive shortstop. In the rotation, obviously they started the year with Anderson Espinoza and Roniel Raudes. They got some pretty good performances out of guys. Daniel Gonzalez had a pretty good year. Emmanuel DeJesus was okay. Logan Boyd had a good year. And the bullpen was pretty solid as well. Jake Cosart before he got promoted. Angelo Leclerc before he got promoted. Bobby Pointer before he got promoted. Stop me if you heard that before. Victor Diaz actually had a pretty good year eventually later in the year, turning it on. And they also got a couple guys from Lowell and Steven Nagosic and Gerson Batista later in the year. Wound up being a pretty interesting prospect-wise roster, and I'm really going to be interested to see how that Salem lineup looks next year with some of these guys, Ian.
Yeah, no, I think it was, as the results, as you said, they obviously, especially in the second half, weren't great on the field. But I think that prospect-wise, it was a good year for them. Some guys took steps forward, as you alluded to. There weren't really that many, disappointments. I maybe like Michael Chavis a little bit, but that was more due to injury again, I would say.
Maybe.
We'll see. I'm not a huge fan of his prospect-wise, but yeah, he. Other than that, but guys, as you alluded to, Akami took a step forward. Still like Jeremy Rivera, have been pushing that for a while. Matheny took a step forward, especially after how bad he was in Lowell last year, which was a good sign. As you alluded to, like Victor Diaz out of the bullpen. Raudes was solid again. So it's got some interesting guys. I don't know how many necessarily are impact players. I would say actually almost none of the guys I listed are. But I think there's potential, that a few big leaguers can turn out of that crop right there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Going down the ladder to Lowell, I might double back to you on this one, Ian, because you've seen them a lot. Probably one of the more interesting lineups they've had in a while, top to bottom. We've had years where they had one or two really interesting guys, but this year they had a couple of guys in the lineup and some high draft picks in Bobby Dahlbeck, C.J. Chatham eventually, Yohan Ibar for a guy who was interesting coming out of the international signings in the Dominican Summer League program. And then in the rotation, some interesting guys in Josh Pennington, Darwinson Hernandez, and then some draft picks there as well, Mike Shawarian. Eventually, they got a start or two out of Jason Groom. I think Groom made a playoff start too, right? So an interesting year there, pitching-wise. Some guys in the bullpen who I already mentioned, a draft pick in Matthew Gorst. Certainly an interesting year there in Lowell, especially compared to past years. I guess both of you, we'll start with Ian, but Matt, obviously you've been there too. You should throw in your thoughts if you have them. Thoughts on Lowell? I should also mention they did make the playoffs. They wound up winning the Stedler division of the New York Penn League at 47-29. So solid record out of them. I think highest season wise, maybe second to Salem actually in the system. In the playoffs, I think they lost in the first round in 3 games, correct? Or did they get swept?
I think they got swept.
Yeah, they got swept. Pretty good year out of them, though. A good year for the Spinners.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting team, and that's kind of why I was there a lot. It had a nice blend of draft picks. They got lucky, obviously, that the Red Sox loaded up on college guys. I think they got 2, 4, 6 of the first, or 7 of the top 10 picks. I think ended up there.
Depends how much you count Sean Anderson, but.
Yeah, but or actually 8 if you. I completely forgot about him. 8 if you at some point 8 of the top 10 picks were there, and 9 if you include Gorse because they didn't sign their 11th rounder. Mm-hmm. So they got kind of lucky in that sense. But also it was they had a couple interesting guys come up from the GCL last year. Algenis Martinez out of the bullpen, somebody you didn't mention, who actually took a pretty big step forward this year, is kind of interesting now. Tyler Hill put up good stats. Not sold, but yeah, we'll see on him. Yohan Ibar had a decent year. There's some issues there, but he'll flash some tools. And then obviously the big guys, Dahlbeck had an incredible year. C.J. Chatham really turned it on in the second half. He was someone who in the first half I really didn't, or not in the first half, but his first couple weeks in the system with them, I didn't really have a good read for him. But kind of the more games he played, you could see he was getting more comfortable with the level and the pitching and just putting together better at bats. And he started really squaring the ball up later in the year and turned into one of their better hitters by the end of the year. So that was a good sign. And then as you alluded to, the pitching, Shawarian, Groom, Pennington, Hernandez, they had some guys who threw hard and definitely have some intriguing tools. So it's going to be, I'm interested to see how many of these guys will jump up to Greenville next year, or if any of them will go directly to Salem. And it's going to be an interesting group of guys there.
Yeah, a couple of those college guys, like you wonder if a Shawarian might be a guy they try and fast track.
But, exactly. I think I could see. Well, I guess we'll discuss it later because I think that's an email question too.
And we'll see the bullpen guys too. Steven Nagosic already getting to Greenville.
Batista's already in Greenville.
Batista too. Yeah. Matt, any thoughts on Lowell? Just because you got there a lot too.
Oh no, I just add that I thought this was a really good team, especially compared to past Lowell teams where you have a few decent guys, and it looks like this might be a really good draft too. I mean, I don't know about the. We'll see what Jason Groom does and some of the top guys, etc. But guys like Shawarin, Dahlbeck, some people like Sean Anderson, even what Ian just said, C.J. Chatham. It looks like they got a lot of interesting guys. There aren't any guys that are looking just not that great so far, and you can sort of see where they're going with this draft, and it looks really good so far. We'll see how they progress, but it's definitely a much interesting team than past couple of seasons.
You get seasons where the Lowell Spinners just have a really, to be frank, uninteresting roster. You could see years like looking at this year's team. Tyler Hill had a great season, right? You have seasons in Lowell where like he's the best guy on the team and it's not close. You know what I mean? And it's just kind of like he's just Tyler Hill, like he's interesting.
Yeah,
maybe there's a chance, but but they did have a lot of influx of talent this year. Going down to the GCL, Gulf Coast League Red Sox, they were in the playoff hunt. They actually wound up finishing, I think, I thought they were tied for the Gulf Coast League South Division Championship. They were, and they wound up. I guess the one game playoff they had with the Twins counts in the regular season. So technically they finished 33-28, beating the Twins in a one game playoff for the division crown, and then going to the playoffs, and they lost in the league semifinal game to the Cardinals, I believe, who went on to win the league championship. So a good season for them. It's really a team at this point, and I think we're starting to see the results of having two Dominican Summer League teams down in the Gulf Coast League, because it is a heavily Latin American roster if you really look at it. Some of their stars were, at the plate. It's, Lorenzo Cedrola, Juan Barriento, Rywinson Lameda, guys who came up through the DSL program, Stanley Espinal, Imeldo Diaz, Yomar Valentin before he got hurt, or at least we assume he got hurt because he stopped playing. And then, you look at the pitching, it was guys like Jonathan Diaz, Victor Garcia, Yorvin Pantoja, Hildemar Requena, Ryan Oduber, Denny Reyes, Junior Espinoza. Again, all these guys came up through the Dominican Summer League program. I think definitely the heaviest Latin roster we've seen down there in a while. Wound up performing well and got some performances out of some guys who were drafted, like Robbie Sexton. Kyle Hart pitched pretty well for them down there as well. A decent season down there. That said, I think, with the Gulf Coast League and with the Dominican Summer League, which I'll get to in a minute, you always want to wait and see these guys at higher levels before you get too excited. I think we can all agree on that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell because that, it's not the best baseball being played down there.
It's high school ball, basically.
Yeah. More or less.
You can't really say much about the stats besides like take note of the guys who are doing well, maybe bookmark them for the future, but you don't want to start drawing conclusions about who they're going to be or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, so often we see guys who dominate in the Gulf Coast League, they get to Greenville and it's just they never get past Greenville, and these are guys who dominate the Gulf Coast League. It's a 4-team round robin all season long.
Yeah, you see the same pitching over and over again.
You see the same pitching, and it's if one team is not good and you run up your stats against them, it's like, it's one thing if it's the South Atlantic League and there's one team that stinks and you're running up great numbers against them, but you've got the other 11 or 10 teams you play.
7.
And it evens out 7.
6, actually, because it's 8 right now. It's going to 10.
That's I thought I said the South Atlantic League.
I thought you said the Carolina League. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, you're
well,
right.
I was going to say even the Carolina League only has 8 teams, but still, at least there's 6 other teams if one team stinks.
Yeah.
But I can remember even like Michael Almanzar having 10 homers and 8 of them were in Myrtle Beach or whatever the park is where the ball flies out of in that league.
Asheville.
Maybe. Well, no,
Asheville it flies.
Asheville's the South Atlantic League.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. God. Carolina.
Come on,
yeah.
Keep up.
Sorry. I will say, though, on your... Oh, okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you mentioned that it was mostly Latin American heavy. I think we're seeing though that this is kind of under the new draft structure. That's what it's going to be like. Like you look at this year, Jason Groom was the only high school guy who got any money, and after that, I don't think they signed a high school guy after the 10th round, did they?
But how often do you sign a high school guy after the 10th round, though?
I mean, but in past drafts, you would, like in. For example, I'm just going back 2013. I think that was post.
That was under these rules.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Brian Hudson, Monhe, Dubone, Nick Longy, Rafael Oliveras, Pat Getz. There's like 6 or 7 guys right there. They just didn't.
Jalen Williams. Yeah, there's a lot of guys. You're right.
So they just didn't this year because of the way they had to funnel all the money to Groom basically, and then in addition, it turned out Schwarian and Dahlbeck.
Right.
Or Schwarin, that they just didn't have any. Sorry about that. They didn't have any money to throw to those later round guys who you would assume would start in the GCL. So that's why I think it was so Latin heavy this year. Actually, they did sign Juan Carlos Abreu.
Yeah. And actually, looking at it, they even last year they signed like Andrew Noviello. Nick Duran was a JUCO guy.
Yomar Valentin was a high school guy.
Yeah, well, he was Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's kind of the exception because those guys have quote commitments. But
true, yeah. Nick Hamilton, I think. Did you mention him?
Nick? So, no, I didn't. But he's also an example. So that's interesting. But yeah. Anyway, that's a good point. And then finally, just getting down to the Dominican Summer League. Of course, a very turbulent season down there. With we're going to try and have a podcast coming up focusing on the whole international signings issue. Maybe tie that into the Padres stuff as well if we can. But both DSL Red Sox teams, despite the fact that they lost 5 of their key players during the season, won their division and made the playoffs, and the DSL Red Sox wound up winning the league championship. The DSL Red Sox, the Red Sox won. We got a first-round bye, won in the semis, and won the championship. The Red Sox, too, did not get a bye, won in the first round, lost in the semifinals. Would have been really funny to see an all-Red Sox championship series down there. But that said, a good season down there. Stat-wise, I mean, it's even more so than the Gulf Coast League. You almost have to ignore the stats, but we'll learn a lot more about these guys when they come stateside. I know the pitching. I mean, for example, our pitcher of the year for the Dominican Summer League was Ritzy Mendoza of DSL Red Sox 1. But that said, he's 20 years old and was in his 4th year at the level. So it basically would be like having a 20-year-old pitching high school Legion ball. He should have video game numbers, frankly. But yeah, good year down there. Some guys that you'll hear about, and we'll wait till you hear, till they come stateside. Really, there's a bunch of them who are coming to Instructs who we'll talk about in a little bit. But definitely an interesting year down there. I don't know unless you guys have anything to add on the Dominican Summer League. I think we should probably just move on to the Fall Instructor League roster, which was released on September the 13th is when Baseball America had it, but we posted it on the 14th with the schedule. Today, the 18th, is actually the day everyone's reporting. The first game is on the 22nd, which is on Thursday. Roster got released. You can find it on the news page at news.soxprospects.com, and we'll also be posting our Fall-Winter League page soon, so that'll be linked from the front page, but it's soxprospects.com/fall-winter.htm. That'll have the roster on there too. I just need to link up pictures for the Arizona Fall League guys, and then I'll post that. Kind of interesting. Let's see, the pitching staff, you got some draftees. You've got some interesting guys there who maybe seem a little bit advanced for that level. And actually, I think I'm going to bring up the one that we got via email because that's a lot easier to read and make note of. Any guys, I guess, Ian, if you're going down, maybe give me a pitcher and a hitter that you're looking forward to seeing down there, who whether you've seen them or whether you're just looking to see changes from what you've seen during the year.
Pitcher, probably, I'd like to see Groom again. I want to see the changeup. That was the big thing. He threw 1 when I saw him the first time and only seen 2 innings. So you can't really make a full scale, prediction or, get any upside plays or potential with his pitches really after that short outing. So I'd like to see him again. Hitters, and also actually I guess I should add for the pitchers, I like seeing guys I haven't seen before. So that's why Instructs is nice, because you got
Right.
some of the top performers from the GCL and the DSL that I haven't had a chance to see because for obvious reasons. So it would be nice to see those guys. For the hitters, I would say probably I would like to see Pedro Castellanos. He's one of the guys. I think he was the top performing hitter in the DSL.
Yeah, he got our Dominican Summer League Hitter of the Year.
Yeah, so
for the
he's
website.
someone. And then
Hit 326, 394, 496 with 23 doubles, 4 triples, and 3 bombs in 62 games at age 18.
is this a second year in it?
Nope, first. He was a little bit old. He was this is his age 18 season, so a little bit of a diamond in the rough. Signed July 2015. So he actually signed at that point. He was
17.
17. Yeah. So. Wasn't a J2 16-year-old guy, but definitely a nice find by the Latin American scouting crew down there, signed by Rolando Pino and Ernesto Gomez.
But yeah, so him, and then obviously again, it's the guys I haven't seen before, or I'd like the guys like Lorenzo Cedrola, who I've seen, but in spring training it's hard. You'll see one at bat, especially from the young guys over like the 3 days you're there. So just try to establish a base with a lot of guys I haven't seen, and get that ready for going forward in the next season.
Yeah, you really can focus. It's 26 hitters and 22 pitchers, and you can focus in a way that you can't in spring training, really.
Well, and that's the thing. There's only one game going on, and the way they do it is that they usually start the same guys every day and then make substitutions like in the 6th inning. Mm-hmm. So you have a pretty good idea of the guys they're focusing on, or who like they are kind of looking at, and then you can kind of go off of that. And like for example, last year Stanley Espinal was someone who played every day at third base. Mm-hmm. And he was one of the guys who jumped directly, who was in the GCL this year. Started. I think he was in the DSL last year, but
yep.
So there's kind of like, it's a good first look at guys like that, and it's more structured than spring training. They play in JetBlue. There's no one there really except for a few scouts and then front office guys. So it's just a really it's more of a low key baseball environment. You don't have all the bells and whistles you have when you have spring training with people all over the place and everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Matt, anybody that jumps out to you on these rosters?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing maybe about Sean Anderson. I don't think Ian mentioned him because he was in Lowell a little bit and didn't look right, or wasn't very good. Got sent down to GCL. Not sure if it's just coming off the long season or something they're working on with him. But Ian had heard good reports on him coming out of college. Guys that liked him as maybe a potential starter out of the guys they drafted. So I'm interested to hear about him if we get to see him. Maybe on the hitters, more on CJ Chatham. I remember Ian liked Imeldo Diaz, so see if there's anything there still, maybe. But the other thing I was going to mention is a couple older guys, Kozart and Buttrey seem a little odd. I'm actually going to give Amfox credit for this on our former moderator on our forum. And he was saying, possibly they could be keeping them ready for AFL. I don't know if that's something, I can't remember if that's something they've ever done in the past, but it does make some sense for that as a potential taxi squad. Because, both of them, I don't know, maybe Buttrey you could say is still transitioning to relieving, but I'm not sure if that's something that Instructs really would be that helpful with. And then also Lynn is there.
Sue Lynn, who was a shortstop in Portland this year.
Yeah, potentially transitioning to a super utility role. I know we've mentioned. I don't know if we haven't mentioned on the podcast, but yeah, he's a guy who plays good defense, can run a little bit. Maybe potentially, if he's going to make the majors, that would be the role that he would be able to succeed in.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's listed as an outfielder, so we checked on that. Lynn he got 5 games in center field this year in Portland. Sue Lynn, of course, he signed back in 2012 for a $2,050,000 signing bonus, more or less. I think it was basically that much because he signed on June 27th of 2012, and that was days before the new international signing bonus cap was going to go into effect. So I think that inflated the signing bonus to a significant degree. He wasn't necessarily thought of as a $2 million talent coming out of Taiwan. But that said, he definitely probably would have at least gotten $1 million. Slick fielding shortstop, who's never really been able to hit. To be perfectly frank, this year in Portland hit 223, 287, 293 in 108 games. Basically, was a bench player, not even a bench. Wouldn't call him a bench player, more of a role player, kind of getting spot starts in the infield at shortstop and at second base, and as I mentioned, a couple of starts in center. So I think this is part of them transitioning him into more of a utility role. The same thing that they're apparently going to be. We didn't mention this on the last podcast, but Mauricio Dubon is actually going to be playing some outfield in the Arizona Fall League. Kevin Thomas of the Portland Press-Herald reporting that. Basically speculated about it and then checked on it and heard that he was in fact correct, that Dubon is going to get some time in the outfield, which I think makes a ton of sense.
Yep.
To do that in the Arizona Fall League, especially where there's really a lot less pressure. So he can just go out there and learn and not worry about. We say that the games don't count, but when you're out playing the game of baseball, you want to win, and you don't want to cost your team games. You don't want to cost, your pitcher outs. Leave your pitcher out there for longer than he needs to be, and things like that. So, good spot for him. They're doing the same thing with Lynn. The Cozart and Jake Cozart and Ty Buttrey thing. Buttrey makes some sense as a guy who transitioned to a bullpen role mid-season in Portland. For big tall right-hander, maybe kind of help him work some kinks out there. And he's got innings to spare. Same thing with Cozart. He's got innings to spare because he was a starter last year and worked out of the bullpen this year. But yeah, I could easily see they've sent guys from Instructs to the fall league before. I think, but they've used it in the past as a reward for like the pitcher of camp essentially. But they've also done that with guys who I remember last year Aaron Wilkerson was in the Arizona Fall League, but he had to leave because he was going to be on the Baseball World Cup team. And so they sent Justin Haley to take his spot in the rotation in the Arizona Fall League. So they have sent guys mid Arizona Fall League before, so maybe they'll do that with those two, one or both of them. So good points there. Moving on from there, I guess just really quickly, and then we'll get to emails. But the situation with the San Diego Padres, the reports mostly from Buster Olney of ESPN has really been kind of the lead guy on these reports, I think. I think Jeff Passan of Yahoo Sports may have broken one or two things as well. But
Dennis Lin from the San Diego Tribune, I think, also.
Okay.
Got to throw. Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah. Sorry, I got a distracting text message. Basically what happened is that the Padres, in spring training, A.J. Preller instituted a system in which his medical staff was to keep two different sets of records. One which would be shared publicly as through the normal Major League Baseball protocol, and one which would only be for their private use, essentially, hiding certain information from teams. And what I guess is supposed to happen is that every time a player sets foot in the trainer's room, it is supposed to get documented, whether he's in there to take aspirin, whether he's in there because he stubbed his toe. That said, some teams are apparently more vigorous with, they're keeping their records than other teams, but that said, I don't think anyone was really trying to game the system to this degree. Major League Baseball investigated after a number of trades the Padres made after the trade deadline. The receiving teams were startled to learn of treatment that the players had been receiving with the Padres. And as it turns out, Major League Baseball found that there was enough done here to suspend A.J. Preller. Is he the GM of the Padres, or does he have one of these president of baseball operations titles?
I think he's the GM.
He's the GM, right? Okay, that's what I thought. But he's the GM of the Padres, was suspended for 30 days without pay. And that's it. Which apparently has, the Red Sox up in arms. I had read some reporting initially when this broke out. This was back when this was first reported on, again, by Olney, right around the trade deadline. And he had reported at that point that the Red Sox were basically one of the teams that brought this to Major League Baseball's attention, and that they were not seeking any compensation at that time. So he did report that. But apparently now the Red Sox are upset with the fact that Preller basically got a slap on the wrist. And this is a guy who's a repeat offender. He got in trouble with the Rangers, some issues they had on the international amateur signing front. He'd been punished once before when he was in charge of that for the Rangers. And now he's kind of a repeat offender with the Padres. We should also mention, they made other trades. For example, they made a trade with the Marlins where the pitcher they traded to the Marlins within a week needed Tommy John. And so they took the player back and gave the Marlins one of their players that they had traded back. But that said, a couple things that stand out to me. First of all, based on the reports, this is something that started in spring training. So before, I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, obviously this played into the Craig Kimbrel trade too. Based on the reports, it did not, and that is why the Craig Kimbrel trade was not considered. This is just the Pomerantz for Anderson Espinoza trade. Guys, I guess what are we to make of this? Did I miss anything? What's your response, Ian? What's to make of this?
I mean, I think it's interesting that all that Preller got was a 30-day suspension after the season is basically over, which, I mean, it doesn't mean anything. Like, I don't know. It doesn't change their operating procedure. It's not like
the
they have to
minor league
hire.
Season's over.
Yeah, the minor league.
What are they
season.
doing?
But what is he going to do? The Padres aren't in the playoff hunt.
Yeah, non-contending team. This is like the least.
Yeah, there's
activity.
he can't go to Instructs. I'm sure, like every team, they have a feed that he can watch from his home. Like
he apparently was at the first day of Instructs.
Well, because it doesn't start till Monday.
Because it doesn't start till Monday.
Yeah, it starts tomorrow. But like, I mean, I'm sure the Padres have an internal system where he can watch all the games from his house. Like, this isn't a punishment. It's like, really. I mean, I guess it's a fine. That's what it is, because he loses 30 days pay. So that's what it is. It's a fine. Mm-hmm. And, for a GM, to be fair, that is a semi-big deal, because obviously it's not like they're making player money unless you're Theo Epstein. So, the fine is legitimate. But at the end of the day, the Red Sox got a guy who, it turns out, had been, I think they reported Pomerantz had been receiving treatment on his shoulder or something for most of the season. Elbow? Okay, there you go. Thank you, Matt. And that wasn't reported. And, I mean, I wonder if they knew that, if they're willing to give up Anderson Espinoza for him. And I doubt they would be if they knew that was the case. And so that's why I understand that you have to punish the Padres, and it's tough to figure out a fair retribution. Like, I don't think that you should be able to undo the trade, because you can't undo what Pomerantz has done since he played for the Red Sox or anything.
Yeah,
like
this
that.
isn't the Colin Ray trade where it was his first start after the trade.
It was, I think, 4 innings in, he blew out, and he had been having elbow soreness like directly before that start. Mm-hmm. But so it's not like you can undo the trade or anything, but I do think that the Red Sox should have gotten something back, whether it be, one of the Padres picks, or I don't know. But the thing is, it doesn't seem like there's a protocol for this. So it kind of seems like it's kind of like tough luck. It is what it is at this point. And
it's how can you have a protocol for a protocol for hiding information? Like if a team is found to have not shared information, like you can't have a protocol for every possible thing a team could just. And
that's the thing. But I look at it too. Like, you look at how the Red Sox got punished, and obviously, the MLB found that they were skimming, or what were they doing? They were funneling bonuses up to get better prospects while under restrictions, and they punished them with an entire year of not being able to sign Latin American prospects.
Well, okay, but the thing is, there needs to be context to that. It's a year of not being able to sign prospects when they were already limited to signing guys to, what is it, $200,000?
300
or less, $300,000 or less. So
but
it's
still,
not
that's like 25 guys you're not going to sign. You can't sign.
Well, it's 25 guys because the Red Sox have 2 teams.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I just look at that. That's still, even under the restriction, is a pretty harsh punishment. And then you look at this, and it's like the Padres as a team, there's no punishment to them. It's just the individual.
Right.
And that just doesn't seem really, it's like AJ Preller is your GM. He's out there representing your team. Like, if he does something, then I feel like there should be some sort of punishment. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. The Red Sox have Pomerantz, the Padres have Espinoza. The trade's done with. I think they've said that there's no discourse or recourse that for any sort of potential something to happen. I
think that it's tough to a lot of people, especially on our forums, are saying, the Red Sox should have gotten a low level prospect from the Padres. It's like, well, how do you decide on who that player is? Like, it's not like there's a player, like, they're not going to get Espinoza back, right? Like, you can't just undo the trade, as you said. But at the same time, so it's like, so then how do you decide what player goes back?
Well, I think the easy solution to that is the draft pick. I mean,
sure.
That seems like an obvious sort of compensation. I read an article on by that Michael McCann, who's the sports legal analyst for SI,
a professor at the University of New Hampshire Law School and a distinguished alum of the University of Virginia School of Law.
There you go.
Is that a good law school?
Yeah, pretty good. He's a good guy too. I've met him. Great guy.
Yeah, he seems like a good guy. And he was saying, a lot of what we've been saying, basically, like when something like this happens, parties look for compensation, and like the article sort of titled like, could they sort of take San Diego to court? But obviously they can't because of the way the CBA is and everything. But
right.
he was pointing that out exactly, like if they'd been negotiating this trade and they knew about the elbow soreness, they would have negotiated it differently. They might have asked for another prospect. They might not have included Anderson Espinoza. They might have included some lower level guys. So it's weird to me that they weren't offered any sort of compensation by the commissioner. And like Ian was saying, it's a little more than a slap on the wrist. It's a non-contending team during one of their least active periods of the season after the trade deadline. So it seems pretty. It's not a huge punishment, I wouldn't say, and it's just kind of weird to me. I don't know what San Diego and AJ Preller thought they were going to get away with this. As soon as you trade the player, it's going to become obvious, what was going on. They're going to tell them what treatment they're receiving and everything like that. So
I think they did get away with it.
They
did
until the deadline, I guess.
But they did. Preller got suspended for 30 days. That's getting away with it.
Yeah,
that's fair, I guess.
They keep the players other than the Colin Ray trade, which that's the other thing, and that's why it's stupid. Is there's no long-term foresight here, but short-term they did get away with it.
Well, yeah,
they got the players
in
the system.
But they had to give back the best prospect they got from the Marlins in that trade.
Sure, but the thing is, honestly, if that had happened. Even if there were that's something that would have happened even if there was no hiding of information or anything. If you trade a guy and if a guy gets traded and he blows his arm out within 4 innings and it's linked to something that happened while he was with the original team, probably happens. That's happened in the past.
Didn't that happen with the Red Sox with someone the Cubs claimed off waivers or something?
Varvaro.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, right.
Am I making that up or did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened. Yeah,
okay.
He reverted back to the Red Sox.
Yeah. So that's something that happens if it's found that it was something that was already in there. So that doesn't necessarily have to do with the hiding of information, but otherwise they kept all the guys they got at the trade deadline.
I'm kind of wondering, what happens now if we find out Pomeranz needs Tommy John, either near the end of this season or beginning of next season. I guess beginning of next season, it's past that point. But say he comes up with Tommy John before the end of this season, I don't know if that's grounds for any. It's probably not technically, but it would definitely create a bigger outcry if that were to happen.
Well, he's thrown 58 2/3 innings for the Red Sox. I don't think you can necessarily link it back to the Padres at that point. And I think that's kind of the difference. But I guess it depends on what they were hiding. At first, it was that they were taking oral medication, and I think
they said he is having elbow discomfort at times earlier this season. So
interesting. Well, anyway, all we can really do is speculate, which is why I don't really want to kind of belabor this too much more. But it's I think the biggest thing that's going to hurt the Padres here, and you wonder if MLB took this into consideration, is the loss of goodwill with other teams. If you're negotiating with the Padres at this point, or do you? I think that's what it is. I think that this is going to hurt them down the road, is why it's very short-sighted on their part. So. We'll have to see if this affects their ability to make deals. But these things, they go away over time too. I think I remember this was way back, and I can't remember the exact details. But the Red Sox and the Rockies were negotiating, and I remember something happened where the Red Sox backed out of a deal that the Rockies thought they had with them, and the Rockies said publicly they weren't going to negotiate. This was in the Theo Epstein regime. This wasn't even Cherington. And they said they weren't going to negotiate with the Red Sox anymore. And then within 3 years, they made a deal. Within 2 or 3 years, they made another trade. So, these things, time heals all wounds, etc. If you see a chance to make your team better, you're going to take it whether or not you like the guy you're making the deal with. So, we'll have to wait and see.
I think I quickly looked this up, and I think it was a trade of Todd Helton to the Red Sox that
No,
they
wasn't it?
reneged on.
Wasn't it Ricky Leday? I don't know why that just popped into my
Oh,
head.
maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you're right.
Leday, Red
yeah.
Sox trade.
It's too far back.
Yeah, I want to say it was Ricky Leday.
Something came out from 2007 about Todd Helton, but now I don't think that was related.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't think it was Helton because this was one that was like
I
actually
know
agreed upon.
Yeah, I remember exactly what you're talking about, but I can't quite remember the players.
Yeah, I want to say it was Ricky Leday, and then the Red Sox went and got somebody else, and they were like, "Sorry, we're good," and the Rockies were understandably kind of pissed. So, all right, well, let's get to emails then. As I mentioned at the top of the show, podcast@soxprospects.com and tweet to us using the hashtag AskSP. And note, guys, if you use the hashtag, you don't have to tweet at any of us, which is part of the point. Giving you some more characters to use to ask your question. And in fact, let's go to Twitter first so that I can close my Twitter. But we got a couple of questions. First question is from Sean. He's got a pretty easy question. He goes, wants to know the starting levels next year for Moncada, Groom, Routes, and he says Sherris. I'm assuming he means Chavis.
Yeah.
But I guess just to start off with Yohan Moncada, we should mention, we were going to make this its own separate segment, but I guess we just decided to talk about it here. Definitely struggling a little bit in the majors. Not supremely surprising. I think we kind of saw that he might struggle a little bit. I don't know that I thought he would struggle to this degree. Thoughts of the handling of Moncada this year before we get into where we think he's going to start next year?
Well, I just think that they rushed him up and they gave it a shot, and it turned out it was too quick. It wasn't ready, basically. And I don't know that I would have necessarily done it any differently. Maybe kept him down there. I think they brought him up a few games before the end of Portland season, but give him a shot, and sometimes it works out, like Benintendi or other young guys we've seen really create a spark, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's what we saw. And I don't think there's any reason we should call into question his long-term future or anything like that. It's just he wasn't quite ready, and if it's an independent race, you don't have time to wait on him and see if he can get it together in another week or two, or start to go up with his performance. So you just don't have that time. You gave it a shot. He didn't get hot, and in the pennant race, you have to fall back on guys who are more experienced. And I think it doesn't change anything for me with his long-term prospect status.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with me that was interesting, I think they maybe jumped into throwing him into the starting spot at third base and acknowledging it publicly a little too quickly. Yeah, and at the same time, I think they pulled back and said he clearly is not ready for the major leagues a little too quickly. So it was a little interesting to me that was over the course of a week. Like, that just seemed way too quick. Like, just keep quiet, man. Give the Bill Belichick answers for a week until you figure out what you want the guy to do. I don't know.
I agree.
Anyway, starting levels next year for Yohan Moncada. Pawtucket, I think we kind of all agree.
Yeah.
Jason Groom, starting level for next year, Greenville.
Yep.
Roniel Routes spent this year at Greenville. Pretty obvious one, starts next year at Salem.
Yep.
And Michael Chavis ended the year in Salem, which is where he's going to start next year. So those were all pretty easy ones. And we should mention that if you go to the SoxProspects.com website, there's a 2017 projected rosters that you could go to for questions like that too. So thanks, Sean, for the question. Our next question on Twitter comes from Craig, who didn't quite use the AskSP hashtag correctly, but we'll give him a mulligan for the first week we've done it. He says, the question is, which prospects could we see used in a trade as a centerpiece or throw-in? I don't think that asked the way it is asked, that's really a question that we can answer. Because as we've seen, literally any prospect could be used in a trade. That's just the thing. Like, it depends who you're trading for. That said, I think, a question that we answered last year that we hit on the head was which prospects during the offseason do you think are most likely to be traded? And I think that's one last year that we answered: Manuel Margot and Javier Guerra, who wound up getting traded in the Craig Kimbrell deal, of course. So, guys, I guess looking at the system, who are some areas or who are some guys you see as potential trade bait going into the offseason who might be the most likely if the Red Sox were to make a trade to be on the move? Matt?
Um, well, in a top level trade or a trade top level guy, I think would be Devers. You have the Moncada moving over to third base now. We have I don't know, Dahlbeck coming up behind him. Not that you want to count on him yet, but you have some other guys. Marco Hernandez could play some third. Dubon maybe could play third. So I think that's a position you have some strength if you have a high level deal. That would be for like maybe a elite ace type pitcher. And Marco Hernandez and Dubon are a bit overlapping with their utility type ceilings. So one of those two definitely. I guess those would be my top two off the top few guys.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Ian, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Dubon, Hernandez. I think Luis Alexander Basabe could be in play if we find a team that really likes him, given their outfield is young and pretty locked in for the next few years. I could see them trying to sell high on Michael Kopech if you can find a team that believes that he's a front of the rotation starter, though I'm not sure if there's a team out there that will believe that. Kind of lower level guys, I think you could see someone like same thing like a Josh Ockamy thrown into a trade as a first base only type. That's not really first baseman, I think, are
potential sell high candidate too.
Exactly,
honestly.
yeah. Which kind of like what they did with Guerra last year. When we saw him in Greenville, we talked about how I think he can pick it, but we have questions about the bat long term. And I think he hit under 200 this year in the California League, which is a big issue.
Yeah.
So, Ockamy strikes me as someone who they could try to sell high on. It was interesting when raised this question. I just looked and I just don't. There's not a lot of guys that I think have as much value given how much they've dealt.
No.
The system falls off pretty quickly. And in past years, you could find guys in the late teens, early 20s that teams would be pretty interested in, as was the case last offseason. But this year, it gets thin pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, almost you wonder if we're more likely to see now that you're allowed to, if some guys who got drafted this year might be potential trade bait. Well,
they did it last year. They traded.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Where I mean, maybe it's if a team really believes in Mike Shawarian as a starter, perhaps, or a team thinks that Steven Nagosic might move quickly and become a part of a bullpen next year or early the year after. The one I want to throw out to you guys as a potential wild card is, what if a team really believes in Andrew Benintendi as a center fielder? And you're using him to get you would be for a high level ace type, like a Sale type, but you got to look at that, right? Because he's worth more to the team that's going to play him in center if they believe in the glove in center field than he is to the Red Sox in left, right?
Well, especially with Moncada not a guarantee for third base.
Yeah.
Like, there's a chance Moncada ends up in the outfield. I would not, rule that out. And if that's the case, you're going to run it. If he can't play third base, where obviously we haven't seen enough to know there yet, but if he does show that, then there kind of puts them in a pickle because there's no infield position available if he can't play third base. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to put an athlete like him at first base. So it's like they could run into that situation. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hate it. The idea of a Benintendi Bradley outfield for years to come is intriguing, especially given the low costs and the ability or the money it would allow them to funnel towards the pitching. But yeah,
and Edwin Encarnacion to play DH. But yeah,
well, that's tampering though. We can't go there. We'll delete that. If they were to trade a young guy, I think Benintendi would be the most likely. But I don't think they will.
I think Devers more than Benintendi.
You know what? I take that back. Get rid of the. I don't think they will, because I don't want to turn into Hatfield with the Adrian Gonzalez trade and make statements like that. So,
no, I was going to say I think it's a good point on Benintendi. They have the two other young outfielders, so they're sort of locked into those at a low price, and they'll probably. I mean, with all these young guys, they'll probably start. I think they're going to have some money to spend, and that's a position that. You can find sometimes big sluggers, not necessarily that are coming up. I mean, there's like a Jose Bautista who's not coming off his greatest season, but it's a position that you can fill, especially when you have all other positions sort of locked up with a lot of young guys at this point.
Right, right. Just something to think about. I don't think they're going to move Benintendi, but anyway.
They've
thanks for the
also, I've heard
questions, guys.
Jackie Bradley. Not that this fits our topic, but Jackie Bradley has potentially moved. I think they mentioned Sale, Quintana trades possibly.
That could make sense. Yeah, well, because wasn't Bradley the ask for?
Yeah, that's what I meant. I think.
Was it Quintana? No.
Sale. Yeah. I heard
No.
him mention
Who
the
was
White
it?
Sox were asking for him in general.
Yeah.
For those two pitchers.
Which, yeah. And it would be Jackie Bradley plus. It wouldn't have just been Jackie.
Yeah, I was about to say it just wouldn't be Bradley. All right.
Anyway, so some more questions from the emails. Thanks for those questions, guys. Next question is from Jason in Vermont. And he says, you guys do exceptional work. I love listening to the podcast. I have a question that has less to do with the Red Sox minor league system and is more a general scouting question. So, Ian, this is for you. When you're scouting a player, is there anything they might do mechanically, hitter or pitcher, that is an immediate red flag for you? For me, it is a pitcher with long arm action. Whenever I see a pitcher with a long arm action, I assume they'll never have enough fastball command to be anything more than a reliever at best. I've always loved the scouting aspect of baseball and how so many smart, experienced people can have such varying opinions about a player. Anyways, thanks for the opportunity to ask a question. Ian, anything that sticks out for you when you're scouting a guy?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Hitters hitch in the swing. So when you're going back and you bring your hands down and then up in your load, that's always a red flag because especially when you get up to upper minors, pitchers who have velocity can expose that. You're going to be behind the ball constantly. For pitchers, the long arm action is something I definitely take into account. But I think more is when you see a stabbing motion. So when a pitcher brings his arm back and shows their entire, like basically from their elbow down behind and kind of like a stabbing motion, like they had a knife and they were pushing it into a table. That's something that I was trying to think of a descriptive way to do it.
That was really specific.
Yeah,
but
So if you see a stabbing motion, the track record of guys like that, both with fastball command and then injury issues, is not good. There's some guys in the system who had that, like Chris Balcom Miller was one who had a very pronounced stab, and I think he blew out like a year after.
The guy that always comes to mind for me is a guy that made his major league debut this year in Madison Younginer.
That's another good one. And he's changed his arm action multiple times to end up there.
I remember seeing him. I think it was in spring training, and a player actually saw that and saw him and was like, "Well, that's a Tommy John surgery waiting to happen," or something like that.
Well, and then the other one I was going to say is pitchers who don't stride or use their lower half in their delivery. And a great example of that is Jake Cozart, who. I mean, he had a great year, and you can see when you see him, like the stuff is electric, but that's Tommy John waiting to happen also.
Maybe that's why they've got him in Instructs. They're trying to get him to use his lower half. I mean,
they tried that last year, and we saw what happened. So
I guess that's true.
I mean, it was kind of like with him, the arm strength is insane. Like it's one of the fact that he's like 6'2", he's not like a huge guy, and he can throw 100 miles an hour using only his upper body is insane. But that's another one is guys who don't use their lower half in their delivery. Really good question, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So thanks for that. Next question is one that you guys don't know this, but Ian and I answered this last week on the podcast, and we'll give it an abbreviated version because it's frankly a lot less interesting a question now. But he asked essentially, which guys do we see being added to the 40-man roster this offseason to protect them from Rule 5? He says 7 spots in the 40-man will free up this year, assuming the Red Sox decline Hannigan and Buchholz's team options, which is kind of hilarious. He actually sent this email on August 2nd, which is why he assumed that. Funny how things change. But part of the reason Ian and I answered this, assuming that Luis Alexander Basabe was going to need to be added to the 40-man, but unfortunately fortunately, I guess, for the Red Sox, we realized they signed him a day after the Dominican Summer League season ended that year. So that would have been 2011 or 2012.
2012, I think.
It was 2012, yes. August 28th, 2012. The reason that's significant is because if you sign and are assigned to a team whose season has already finished, you basically get an extra year. So Basabe signed on his birthday on August 28th. The DSL season ended on the 27th. As a result, he does not need to be added to the 40-man until next season, which changes things significantly because now you're looking at a short list of players who you would consider adding of Kyle Martin, Luis Isla, Yankori Pimentel, Henry Ramos, Justin Haley, Teddy Stankiewicz, Jake Romanski, Anuri Tavares. I think that's pretty much everyone. Guys, just really quick, because we're already over an hour here. Who do you think from that list gets added, Ian?
I think Isla and Kyle Martin. I think that's it. I want to say. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to bring up the list again. Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a chance that Pimentel and Haley get added, but I don't. Based on the track record of guys they've added in the past, I don't think it's likely. And I'm not even convinced Kyle Martin is going to get added. Like they showed with Ryan Presley a few years ago that guys like him are kind of fungible. But I think it's likely given that they have room. It's not like, they're going to have issues with the spots. And I think Isla is the only guarantee, though. Like, I don't see any way Isla does not get added. Because if he does, he will. If he doesn't, he'll 100% get picked in the first, 2 picks of the draft. Because he's the lefty up to 97. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, the left-handedness and the other thing, I mean, with outfielders, for example, I know a lot of people have asked us about Anuri Tavares. He's the type of guy where if you lose him, you're losing a bench outfielder. Like, he doesn't project to be a major league starting outfielder. He's not a guy that's going to be easy to stick on a roster because of his defense or his speed. Like we were saying, Basabe is a guy that, say, a National League team would have a lot easier time stashing for a season if they're not competing because he can do things to help the team, if not necessarily start every day. A guy like Tavares, I don't see it as much, honestly. So, Matt, anybody else that sticks out to you as a guy that might get added this year, or no?
No, not really. It'd be kind of interesting because they do have space to see if they do, tell a little bit how they feel about a guy like Justin Haley, if they decide to protect him, if they think there's really something there. Mm-hmm. Kyle Martin, I would have said is a guarantee, but he didn't get called up for September, so I'm kind of wondering how they think of him with guys like Noe Ramirez and Hembry, etc., in front of him. I mean, for one thing, you could say, that they just had too many guys, but if they really thought of Kyle Martin as a priority, I feel like they would have made a space for him and tried to get him at least some exposure to the major league clubhouse. So I'm sort of wondering how they actually feel about Kyle Martin. And a guy like Anuri Tavares, they could have kept him in Pawtucket if they saw a lot out of him this year. I know they had a little bit of a crowded outfield in Pawtucket, but I don't know. Same with Henry Ramos. So I feel like they probably don't feel that strongly about those guys. No. And so I think Jake Romanski might be eligible as well.
He is, yeah. He's a guy that some posters on our forum love.
Yeah,
but
I don't think he's going to
see it.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think he could stick on a major league roster at all at this point.
No. The thing to remember, too, with this that a lot of people forget is that you would rather expose a guy to Rule 5 than expose him to waivers. Because exposing him to waivers, a team can claim him and stick him on their 40-man roster. Exposing a guy to the Rule 5 draft, the other team has to keep them on their 25-man active roster for 90 days of the following season. So, it's not just do we like this guy, do we not like this guy. It's kind of a calculus of, adding a guy to the 40-man only then have to expose them to waivers the following season is unproductive. So that's something to keep in mind with some of these decisions. I'll just mention really quick, next year has the potential to be a very, very interesting Rule 5 season. The list of guys who are eligible for Rule 5 next year includes Trey Ball, Yohan Ibar, Luis Alexander Basabe, Gerson Batista, Jalen Beeks, Rusney Castillo, Jake Cosart, Rafael Devers, Mauricio Dubon, Nick Longy, Danny Mars, Algenis Martinez, a bunch of guys who we don't care about, Jordan Procession, Jeremy Rivera, Chandler Shepard, Sam Travis. So next year looks like it might be really crowded. These things can change, but next year it looks like it's one of those years, like I think it was what was the year where they made the trade that included Stephen Fife, Tim Fedorovich, and Chi-Sin Chang because they had way too many guys who were eligible for Rule 5 the following year, so they just needed to get something of value for them rather than have to use 3 or 4 40-man spots. So worth keeping an eye on. But yeah, thanks for the question, Brady. Maybe we can get to a couple more guys before we got to wrap up. Our next question is a really quick one from Alex, and he says, so I figured I'd shoot you an email. I haven't seen mentioned anywhere on Sox Prospects or other sites, so I wanted to know what your thoughts are on Rafael Devers' stolen base numbers this year. For a guy that's been touted as being pretty slow, he's got 18 on 24 attempts. What do you make of it? And this is in the Carolina League. Devers wound up with, as he mentioned, 18 on 24 attempts this season. Ian, I know we've kind of talked about his speed or lack thereof in the past. Thanks for the email, Alex, by the way. But, yeah, Devers' speed. How do you get 18 stolen bases as a below-average runner?
Minor league catchers. I mean, Garen Cicchini had like 50 steals in Greenville. I don't read into steals totals really at all until you get into like AAA. Because the catchers in the low minors just aren't that good. You know, you don't once you get up to AAA, you start seeing, you know, the Ord catchers who just are catch and throw guys who can really pick it. But down there, you know, you've got guys like Ben Moore's an example. He was catching for Salem a lot this year. His pop times were like 2-1, 2-2 when I saw him. Like that, you're going to run into a lot of catchers who just aren't really catch and throw guys, or you got pitchers who don't know how to hold runners. So I don't. I mean, it's nice, but I honestly would be stunned if he, especially considering last year was 2 the year before, or 3 the year before was 4. Like, it's just not a big part of his game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well,
go ahead, Matt.
I was going to add quickly that, you know, I think it shows good baseball instincts. At least he knows when he can get a base. It's especially if he had like nine caught stealings and nine stolen bases, then that would be one thing. He's just going. But I think 18 to 24, that's a good, it shows good instincts, good knowing when the pitcher's taking longer and when the catcher is what you described, Ian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 75% success rate, which is kind of the break-even point for a stolen base being worth it. That being said, something I did notice, I just pulled it up, a lot of stolen bases in Salem this year. Some of them, I mean, Yohan Moncada had 36, Danny Mars had 31 in 44 attempts, which is not all that great, honestly. Brian Hudson had 26. Mike Myers had 26. And he's not slow, but he's not a burner. Mauricio Dubon had 24 in basically half a season. Joseph Monhay had 19. Rafael Devers had 18. Diener Lopez had 15 in part-time duty, essentially. Jose Sermo was only with the team for 59 games. He stole 10. It was a lot of stolen bases, which makes me wonder whether either they were just running a lot, frankly, and it may have just been a bad year for, either pitchers holding guys in the Carolina League or catchers throwing guys out in the Carolina League or a combination thereof. Or you almost wonder if there's almost like a scorekeeping issue there, our defensive indifferences or, the back end of a double steal or something like that I guess the back end of a double steal is a steal, but you almost wonder if it's a scorekeeping issue, frankly, when you see it systematic like that. Compare that with, Greenville this year only had 3 guys or 4 guys in double-digit steals, which is usually kind of the other way around. So kind of an interesting thing there. All right, let's do one more question, guys, and then we'll save the rest for the next episode. Yeah, all right. He says, hey, guys, wondering if in this next week you can give us your predictions on Jake Cozart and Austin Glorious for next year. Do you guys still find value in them? Just would like a rundown on everyone's opinion on both of these players. And that's from Bright Lights 09. So I don't get if we still find value in Cozart. Cozart, as I mentioned, was the site's pitcher of the year. It seems pretty clear that he starts next year in either Salem or I think there's an outside shot. He starts in Portland. Stats. God, there's the accent coming back.
Sound like John Singer there.
Yeah. Oh God. Stiffs and busts everywhere. Yeah, I mean Cozart. I think he gets to Portland by the end of next year. If not, starts there. Maybe could push Pawtucket if he's really dealing. As for Glorious, I think he goes to Salem and continues his progression there. Any further thoughts on those guys? We've talked a little bit about Cozart. Glorious had kind of a nondescript statistical season, at least on the mound for Greenville.
Yeah, well, actually, I have Austin Glorious' stats up, and after, he gave up 5 runs in his 4th appearance of the year. so from April 27th on, in 66 and a third innings, he had a 2.85 ERA, 64 strikeouts, too many walks, 30 walks, but 220 batting average against. So a lot of good things from basically his fifth appearance on. So I mean, the numbers on the surface are a little worse, just from one outing where he gave up 5 runs. But overall, he had a decent season. Some up and down things, and I think that people were expecting a bit out of him because they were talking about him as a starter, and then when they moved him into relief, they're saying, oh, he could move fast, and that didn't exactly happen. But I think once we sort of pulled back expectations on Austin Glorious, he actually had a pretty decent season, and we sort of see. I think Ian didn't see as much life at his fastball when he was down there, so hopefully either he can regain that, or it was just the time of the season when Ian was down there or something. But I still have some hope for him as a decent relief prospect.
Mm-hmm. He also kind of got bumped back and forth. He made a bunch of spot starts in the season's last month or so too, which is interesting because sometimes there's just a matter of they have a guy who they think can give them some length in a bullpen, starting the bullpen game, and other times it's a guy who they don't mind kind of jerking around. I think it's probably more the former in his case than the latter, but yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on further thoughts on Cosart or Glorious, Ian? We might be able to get to one more.
I think here. Yeah, Glorious stuff was way down, or was down compared to what I saw last year. When I saw him in Greenville this year, I think he's definitely a bullpen guy. We'll see. Cosart's someone who I think we've kind of talked about a lot this year, but he struck out everyone, and part of it is because his delivery is so unique and off-putting, in that he literally doesn't use his lower half at all. That it's just such a quick arm, and he can get his fastball up into the high 90s. And he's someone I would like to see them push pretty quickly. I would not be surprised if he starts next year in Portland, because, as I said, I think he's got limited bullets in there, and you just got to make him count. So he's someone I would like to see pushed aggressively. I don't know if they will, but we'll see. Glorious is more, he's going to be a 23-year-old in Salem. Kind of need to see what he is. See him again next year. Maybe I just saw him in a down outing, but he's more kind of in the follow mode. Whereas Cosart's someone who, there's definitely big league bullpen potential with Cosart.
Right. Yeah. He's a guy who, based on how he dominated when he got to Salem this year, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he got a cup of coffee next year. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But
is he going to the AFL?
No, remember we literally just talked about how he's going to the instructional league.
Well, no, I didn't know if he was on the AFL roster also, though. I don't know.
No, because that's why we were talking about how
you're right.
Might be going to the instructs for
that was hours ago.
Yeah, or 30 minutes or so, whatever.
Same thing.
It's fine. Let's just do one more quick one. I think because I telegraphed this one earlier in the show, so I don't want to be made a liar of. But the question is, I would be interested to know what you think about Salem pitcher Matt Kent, his season, pitching growth this year, playoff outing, projectability, etc. Kent actually, he's a guy who's really been kind of below the radar all season long. In his first full season, he got drafted out of Texas A&M last year, pitched for Lowell in 2015, and this year he started the year, I believe, in Greenville. I got to pull up the progression because I thought he was in Salem all year. I think he was just in Salem for most of the year.
Yeah, he was. I think he was the first one from the draft to make it to Salem, but he wasn't.
Well, no, it would have been Lakins.
Okay, well, yeah. So the first one after that, I guess.
Yeah, because Lakins started the year in Salem, but he only made 2 starts in Greenville before getting called up to Salem to make his next start on the 18th of April. So, usually we have a guy who, even if it's a college draftee, if it's a guy who gets drafted and starts the next year in Salem, we're all excited about it. He spent all of this year in Salem. It was pretty good, frankly. Kent this year, let me pull up the numbers. We'll ignore the 2 starts in Greenville, but made 26 starts in Salem, 156 innings, went 10-7, 3.69 ERA, whip of 131. Basically, he gave up 171 hits and 156 innings, so too many hits there, but only 4 home runs, 120 strikeouts to 33 walks, so a good ratio there. Ian, you saw him in Lowell, I hope, or did either of you guys see him in Lowell? Because I don't think we really got to see him this year in either Salem or Greenville.
Yeah, I saw him in Lowell. I think I saw him in spring training this year too.
Mm-hmm.
He's he's not a big guy. He's 6 foot 175. Really, he's skinny. Kind of looks very young. It's a baby face. But
Yeah.
he's just kind of a deception. Pitchability left-hander, and he was pretty good with Lowell last year, and you can see why he gets guys out. He really knows how to pitch, throw strikes, mixes pitches well, fastball, slider, changeup. And I think the biggest thing is he's kind of a la we've seen with guys like Robbie Scott and Tommy Lane. He changes his arm slot. He'll sometimes he's over high 3/4, other times, 3/4. Sometimes he's sidearm. And so he kind of just gets some deception and kind of off-putting with that by varying his deliveries. And, as a left-hander, as we've seen this year with, again, Robbie Scott and Tommy Lane the last couple of years, the bar is pretty low in terms of stuff. If you can prove you can get hitters out, and by hook or by crook, doesn't really matter how you do it, you have a chance of being a big leaguer. And I think he's kind of the next guy in that mold that if he continues to show he can get guys out, I don't think he's a starter long-term. I think obviously I think he's going to end up in the bullpen. But if he continues to show he can get guys out, and I'm trying to bring up his platoon splits to see. And yeah, so against lefties this year, he had 57 strikeouts in 48 innings, only gave up 42 hits and no home runs, versus against righties. Yeah, he's pretty big platoon splits this year. So he's someone who I think, they definitely has a chance as a lefty specialist if he continues to show like he is, and, just keep, mixing pitches and just get outs. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, the slash line against left-handers is 237, 283, 311 in Salem versus right-handers 298, 347, 423. So,
Which,
770 OPS against right-handers versus a 593 OPS against left-handers. So,
that lines up, with what you given his stuff and the command or his profile. That's kind of what you'd expect. It's the kind of guy who, with he's got the slider and the changeup. That you can use secondaries, but when you're 84, 88, as a lefty, that's right-handers are going to be able to sit back on that versus lefties. Especially if you have some deception like he does, you can definitely get them out with that velo.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap it there, guys, because we're running way long here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more questions in the hopper, and of course, if anybody else wants to send in questions to the podcast, the email is podcast@soxprospects.com. On Twitter, you can ask at #AskSP. You don't have to include our Twitter handles. You can just use the hashtag. We'll see it. We'll get to all these questions. They're all good. So we definitely want to get to those. So if you sent one in, don't worry. We're not ignoring you. We just don't want to have a 2-hour-long podcast here. So I guess, gentlemen, unless we have anything else, I'm going to wrap it up. For Matt, for Ian, I'm Chris. Thanks for the download. And we'll be back. I guess we can turn another one around pretty quickly because we've got all these questions in reserve. So
and instructs.
Yeah. So when are you going in? Oh, well, you got to book the tickets. Maybe we'll talk when you get back from Instructs in a couple of weeks.
Soon. We'll just say soon. Yeah.
Soon. 2 or 3 weeks probably. We'll be back with the Instructs wrap up and the rest of your podcast questions. So for these two, I'm Chris. Thanks for listening, everybody.